Have you ever brought home a new plant and watched it die within only a couple of months?
If you have, then this video is for you, because I'm going to share my experience of growing my indoor plant collection to well over 200, so that you can finally keep that Califia alive.
So I've made every mistake there is to make when looking after plants, and that was all because I didn't really know what I was doing.
I mean, it seems simple enough, right? Put it on a windowsill and water every week. Where could it all go wrong?
But it did go wrong, and many times. And I'm sure it's gone wrong for you too, and maybe you're pulling your hair out not really knowing why.
For a good while, all this watching my plant die and repeat really frustrated the hell out of me. So much so that I'd turn my back on them and vowed never to buy one again.
But then lockdown happened, and I was bored and thinking of ways I could spruce up my home, so slowly I started to pick up a few smaller ones to see how I got on. There were still a couple of casualties, but with the help of some planty YouTubers and a lot of Googling, things started to turn a corner, and then it hit me.
Accidentally killing a plant doesn't have to be the biggest disaster in the world. As long as I turn those accidents into learnings, I should embrace them and carry on regardless.
So now, I'm not really afraid to make mistakes. If I think a plant is looking a bit lanky, I have no qualms about giving it a chop.
Either the plant will thrive, or will make its way to the compost heap. I'll have still learned a ton.
So through lots of trial and error, I've come to realise that I just need a few simple things to be in place and they will thrive. The common theme that you'll find throughout all the tips I'm going to share in this video is that less is more.
One of the main reasons I was having so much trouble at the beginning of my journey was that I was tinkering too much.
It's tempting to bring a new plant home and immediately repot him into a bigger pot with some premium houseplant soil that you bought at the same time as the plant.
You feel like you want to do something to settle him in, right? So you roll out the red carpet, but in most cases this just isn't necessary.
In my experience, the first 3 months when you brought him home is the most critical. If we can get over that hump and have no issues after 3 months, then we're in good shape. This is because your little guy is going through a big change and needs time to settle.
The warmth, the humidity, the light, the water, the fertiliser, it's all new to Mr. Plant, and if we're not careful we can make him grumpy, or worse, send him on a one-way ticket to the compost heap.
I never repot a new plant, even if the soil is bad or is root bound in his pot. The change from shop to house is big, and then if we start tinkering with his private parts, we're only asking for trouble.
That pot is the one he's been calling home for God knows how long, and it's all he's got to remind him of his old life. And if we rip it from him from day one, he'll be unhappy.
I exaggerate a bit of course, but in my book it's best to just pick a spot in your home and leave him to get settled. I'm experiencing this phenomenon right now in fact, with a couple of purchases I made about 3 months ago. It's pretty painful to watch, I must say. This guy arrived in glorious condition and I was smitten, but slowly he's been losing leaves faster than I've been losing hair. I did follow my own advice of just leaving him be, but I think I made a grave mistake that I've only just corrected.
Before I spill the beans, let me encourage you to download my free plant troubleshooting handbook that is linked in the description. It's helped thousands of planty folks like you diagnose their plant problems. It's completely free with no strings attached.
Now, there is one single thing that matters most to plants above pretty much everything else.
It's not fertiliser or soil or even watering, although that does come in a close second. It's light.
Get the light wrong and we're not going to have a happy plant in our home. But there are two problems we often face when it comes to light.
In my one-to-one consultation calls, folks often ask me to help diagnose their plant problems, and it normally always boils down to how much light the plant is getting.
In most cases, it's not enough. So, is this what is happening to this guy? I mean, he's not that close to the window, is he? Well, no actually, because just last week he was spending his time here, and on reflection, it was the wrong spot for him. This is a bright conservatory and that window faces southwestish, and so this guy was getting lots of direct sunlight on his leaves.
There are tons of plants that would be fine with this, but apparently not this guy.
I should have tweaked on much earlier than I did because he was drying up much faster than my other plants. He'd often don the droopy look, which is never a clever look to don, is it?
So what's the takeaway from all this?
To be careful with any new plant you buy. They do all want bright light, but be careful about putting him in a sunny spot, at least while you're getting to know him.
You might think that plants are fine getting sun on their backs in the great outdoors, but most of our tropical friends spend their days on the forest floor of the jungle, and so are shaded out by the surrounding trees.
Plus, they've been bred to be indoor plants who aren't really accustomed to the harshest sunlight. But here's the thing, the shade of the forest floor is still much brighter than that dark corner of your living room. This is why I've moved this guy to the back of my conservatory. It's still bright, but not basking. So have a look at where your guy gets to call home. Is he getting blasted by direct sunlight all day? Might be worth moving him to a less intense spot. Is he hidden behind the wall and doesn't have a chance to check out the bright blue sky? If that's the case, then I'd move him nearer to the window. The amount of light your guy is getting will have a massive impact on how much water he needs, which is the second most important part of plant parenthood. Let me put the spotlight back on our friend here. This is a Schismatoglottis, by the way, one of the hardest plants to pronounce out there. Anyway, this sunny spot he got to call home was wreaking havoc on his immune system. Something that I've learned about him is that he's similar in lots of ways to the ever popular peace lily. He likes a drink. Not the alcoholic kind, the H2O kind. Even in this less sunny spot, I'm having to water him more often than his friends. So me putting him in this very sunny and hot spot was only going to end in tears. I just wasn't able to keep up, and when a plant becomes dehydrated on repeat, it really does weaken them. Normally, this is in the shade with brown edges on the leaves, but in this case, the leaves have been turning yellow and then dropping off. This is normally recoverable as long as I stop letting the soil dry out repeatedly, but in the meantime, I'm faced with a plant that is going through, well, let's call it an adjustment period.
But this underwatering malarkey probably isn't even the main cause of your plant woes, my plant friend. I would wager that actually it's the opposite.
Unknowingly watering too much. Yep, that's a thing.
When I only had a handful of plants and looking after them wasn't top of my priorities, I was in the habit of watering them all every Saturday morning.
I'd go round and top up the soil with some water and move on with the rest of my day. In the meantime, they didn't really look their best. Droopiness, yellowing, brown leaf edges, they really were unhappy bunnies.
I did notice their grumpiness and I assumed I wasn't giving them enough, so I upped the quantity I gave, which was a big mistake.
I was committing the ultimate plant sin, to water without checking if they were actually thirsty first.
I mean, it wouldn't be very pleasant to be forced to drink a gallon of water when you've already drunk 2. And this is exactly the same for our green friends.
Go and have a little nosy at the soil of your grumpy plant. Is it wet? If it is, then you're probably watering too much.
But why is this a problem? Plants get rained on all day outside after all, right?
Yes, but they're not living in tiny pots in a place that gets very little air changes. They're in big open spaces with lots of air and warmth to dry out their precious roots. On the other hand, the water in a pot has nowhere to escape, so just sits there sucking the oxygen out of the soil and suffocating the roots. And this is when root rot happens. So the golden rule to houseplant watering is to always check the soil first.
I know it's easy to follow a routine or a plant care app, but they can be more trouble than they're worth.
You can check the soil however you want, your finger, a moisture meter like the one I use, or simply just feeling how heavy he is. I do know it's a bit more time consuming, but it might be the reason your plant is struggling so much.
Now, there is a hack that will make it nearly impossible to overwater your plant. I say hack, but it's not really, it's just a way of doing things.
You see, the thing to avoid is your little fella sitting in a pot of swampy water. This is the real killer. It's not too bad if the soil is damp more often than it should be. This is because there is still oxygen for the roots to breathe. This is the most important thing. So what's the easiest way to stop this? 2 things. First is to always keep your plant in a pot with drainage holes. Pots without holes in the bottom are basically death traps.
If you were to inspect all my plants, then you'd find that they're all living in plastic pots with drainage holes. All except one, this guy.
I only keep him in here as some kind of experiment, but it means I have to be extra careful with my watering. Add too much and I have no way of getting the excess out, apart from tipping him upside down, and I don't really like doing that every time. The second thing is to avoid watering like this. This runs the risk of you giving too much and the plant sitting in a muddy puddle. Fun for Pepper, but not for said plant. Instead, pick him up and water him over the sink. It's simple, I know, but it's the only way to guarantee you'll avoid plant death from overwatering. It's much harder to keep the soil saturated when you let the excess water drain away. The Grim Reaper needs that pot to do his dirty work.
Once you're over the 3-month hump and it looks like your little guy's settled, you might want to find ways to really make him thrive.
You can't go wrong with the right light and watering when he needs it, but eventually you'll get to a point where his home needs a bit of an upgrade. One of the things I've slowly learned over the years is that roots grow faster than leaves. So a plant might look fine on top, but under the hood there's all sorts of carnage going on. I tend to repot when the roots far exceed the amount of soil, and that's maybe once a year or every couple of years depending on the plant. A Monstera's root system, for example, grows super rapido, so it's once a year minimum if you want a healthy, thriving specimen. Wait longer than this and you'll be struggling to hold on to moisture and nutrients, and that'll show in the leaves.
I used to wait far too long to do this, and it really showed. My peace lily kept drooping and my rubber plant just never grew.
Eventually, I did get round to repotting, but then I made another stupid mistake. I grabbed some compost from the garden and plonked him in that.
This is a recipe for disaster. To find out why, so you don't make the same mistake, you should watch this video next.